Good morning to you all. I wish you a very warm welcome to the Orgalim webinar on sustainable products and digital product passports. My name is Stephanie Mittelam and I'm the Orgalim Manager for Energy and Environment. It is really a pleasure for me and also an honor to moderate this webinar today. Before we start, let me guide you through the housekeeping rules for our webinar today. The event is recorded and will be shared afterwards. All attendees are muted. Due to the very high number of attendees, it is not possible for the audience to ask questions in the chat. We are sorry for that. However, together with the various speakers, we have prepared several questions which we believe many of you have in mind and would like to ask the representative from the European Commission. We hope you will find these questions and answers helpful. There will be a Q&A document published after the webinar. There will be also several polls during our webinar to know more on the audience background knowledge and opinion. You will find in the handout section of the GoToWebinar system a copy of the agenda of today's webinar, the bios of the speakers, and the latest new Orgalim position paper about the proposed new eco-design for sustainable products regulation that we have just published this morning and which we will be presenting to you during this webinar. Now let me introduce you very briefly to Orgalim. Orgalim represents Europe's technology industries comprised of 770,000 innovative companies spanning the mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, electronics, ICT, and metal technology branches. Together, all these industries represent the EU's largest manufacturing sector, generating an annual turnover of over 2 billion, manufacturing 1/3 of all European exports, and providing more than 10 million direct jobs. Regarding the Orgalim membership, Orgalim has 48 member associations, 8 corporate members in 22 countries. You can see all the names of our dear members on this slide. Orgalim members are very active on circular economy and sustainable products, in particular since the European Commission published its new Circular Economy Action Plan in March 2020. For your info, we have weekly meetings of our Orgalim Environmental Sustainability Working Group since March 2020. Our webinar today is the second one on sustainable products and digital product passports. The first Orgalim webinar on these topics took place, it's funny, nearly exactly 1 year ago on the 29th of June. Since our last webinar, Orgalim had several meetings with key policymakers, in particular in the European Commission, and with our dear speaker today, Michele Galatola from the European Commission in DG GROW, to continue and deepen our exchanges on sustainable products, the digital product passports, and also on the PEF. Thanks a lot to Michele Galatola for the excellent cooperation, which is very much appreciated by Orgalim members. We are very happy today that our event is a partner event of the EU Green Week, which is taking place this week from 30 of May to 5th of June. EU Green Week is an annual opportunity to debate European environmental policy with policymakers, leading environmentalists, and stakeholders from Europe and beyond. This year's edition of the Green Week focuses on the European Green Deal, the EU's sustainable and transformative growth strategy for a resource-efficient and climate-neutral Europe by 2050. Now let me present you the agenda of our webinar today. We will first hear from our keynote speaker, Michele Galatola, who is Policy Officer at the European Commission in DG GROW, and he will tell us what this new proposed eco-design for sustainable products regulation is all about, and this regulation was adopted by the Commission end of March. We will then hear from Louise Bühnemann. Louise is the chair of our Orgalim Environmental Sustainability Working Group and also the head of EU Environmental Policy at the Confederation of Danish Industries, and she will present you what Europe's technology industries have to say on the impact of these new proposals, as Orgalim is unveiling today its new position paper with recommendations on the subject. We will then have the pleasure to hear from Margot Le Gallou, who is Program Manager at ECOS, the Environmental Coalition on Standards, the perspective of an NGO. And last but not least, we will hear from Jussi Mäkinen, who is Director of EU Regulation at Technology Industries of Finland, a member of Orgalim, the preliminary findings of a digital product passport joint project, which was conducted in Finland between Technology Industries of Finland and Finnish textile and fashion industries. It's now time for the first online polls to get your opinion on some questions. The first question, we would be very interested to know if you already have experience with the current Eco-Design Directive. You have a few seconds to click either yes or no. Please vote online, and then we will announce the results. We can close the vote now, and we will show you the results. So 65% of the participants indicate that they already have experience with the current Eco-Design Directive. Let's now move to the second question we would like to ask you. For the 65% of you who mentioned that you already have experience with eco-design, we would be pleased to hear your opinion on the following proposed answer. Is the current Eco-Design Directive securing the functioning of the internal market? Answer 1. Product-specific requirements work because products differ? Answer 2. Lack of market surveillance creates unfair competition? Answer 3. The process for the measures is too much delayed? Answer 4. All of the above? Answer 5. You have a few seconds to vote. We will now close the vote and have a look at the answers. So 30% of you indicated that product-specific requirements work because products differ. So the product-by-product approach is very important. You will see it's one of the main points of Orgalim position that will be presented today. The second point is lack of market surveillance creates unfair competition, 24%. The process for the measures is too much delayed, 12%. Securing functioning of the internal market, 7%. And sorry, I forgot to mention, last but not least, all of the above, 27%. Thanks a lot for your feedback on this question. We will now move to the star of our webinar today. I will now pass the floor to Michele Galatola, who is Policy Officer in the European Commission DG GROW. Dear Michele, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Good morning to everybody who is following this seminar online. So as mentioned, my name is Michele Galatola. I work for DG GROW in the unit dealing with circular and green economy. Next slide, please. Okay, so as mentioned, recently on the 30th of March, the Commission has adopted what we call the Spring Circular Economy Package, which is made up of a number of important documents, communications, and legislations. In this package, you will find on top of a kind of overarching communication, it's also a document about the circularity of textiles. Is the new strategy for sustainable circular textiles, an action taken by our DG Justice colleagues on rules for empower consumers. And then you will find the eco-design working plan. So under the current eco-design directive, the working plan until 2024. And then the center of that package, which is the new eco-design for sustainable product regulation. So the new legislation that after the co-decision process will be over with the Parliament and Council will become operational. That will dictate the new way of dealing with the product requirements in Europe. Next slides, please. I will quickly accompany you through the reasoning why we have adopted this new legislation, and then I will explain how it will work. In the second part of my presentation, I will devote more time to the issues related to the digital product passport. So the reason why are basically intrinsic to several level of challenges that we need to face. There is an important challenge related to how inefficiently we still use resources in Europe, where too many resources are wasted, are not recycled, are not kept in the cycle. And this, of course, is leading to issues that the recent events made even more important, issues related to material and energy dependency that we think should be addressed through a basket of actions, including actions on design of products. Then there is the well-known environmental challenges related to planetary boundaries that we are exceeding. Climate change is, everybody knows about the importance of that, but there are also other environmental impacts that are becoming more and more important, both on an international, global scale, but also on a European scale. And then there is the issues that are more related to market and to business opportunities. There is on one side the issue of ensuring that the proper functioning of the internal market and the level playing field within Europe. But there is also the opportunity of creating new business models by, for example, allowing a better recycling market to work properly. And this will we see. It's also related to the digital product passport itself. Next slide, please. In terms of, if you compare for the 65% of you that already have experience with eco-design, the existing eco-design, if you compare the new legislation with the old legislation, you will see that there are important changes. There is a change in terms of scope. For example, the old eco-design directive, the existing eco-design directive was mostly focusing on energy using product and partly to energy related products, and mostly looking at the energy component, so during the use stage of the life cycle of the products. With the new regulation, the ambition has been to go wider in terms of product groups. So in principle, all products will be in scope of the new regulation, with the notable exception of food, feed, and some pharmaceutical products. But the scope is also wider in terms of life cycle. It's not anymore a focus only on the use stage, but now it's the entire supply chain that is in scope. And it is a wider scope also in sense of environmental impacts. Energy consumption and energy savings will remain at the core of the work, but now we will also look at other environmental impacts and other circularity elements. I mean, circularity was already included in this part of the eco-design, but now it will become even more prominent. There will be new requirements we will see in terms of information requirements and performance requirements. There will be the possibility of having more horizontal approach when there are elements or characteristics that are common beyond one product group, so are common within multiple product groups. Then there will be the possibility of having secondary legislation targeting specifically certain aspects. And last but not surely least, the increased focus on information through the digital product passport, but also through labels. Next slide, please. Other elements of novelties are a more clear link between environmental performance and public procurement. In particular, there is now the possibility of establishing mandatory green public procurement and linking them to, for example, classes of environmental performance when that will be proven to be relevant and appropriate. There are specific requirements related to prevent the destruction of unsold consumer goods. We will start with transparency requirements, and then in future, if necessary, we will introduce a ban for specific product groups. And then there are also specific rules to improve market surveillance, and also specific rules and requirements on how to link, for example, the use of the digital product passport to more automatic control at customs to improve the work of custom controls operators. Next slide, please. As I said, there are different typology of requirements. We distinguish between performance requirements. These are mandatory requirements, usually related to thresholds that a product has to fulfill in order to be placed on the European market. And this is important to remember, to keep in mind that all the rules apply equally to products produced in Europe and products imported from outside Europe. So they apply when the product is placed on the market. So performance requirements are usually including thresholds, and then there are information requirements where basically there is no threshold, but the mandatory element is that this information has to be provided. So, for example, if there will be a requirement about providing the carbon footprint of a product, then a product will be placed on the market only if that this information is included in the passport or in a label. We will see product by product. And it's important also to keep in mind that these requirements are again product specific. So basically, the legislation that we have adopted in March is a framework legislation. It has no specific requirements included. It will be only through secondary legislation that will be developed by the Commission at a later stage that product by product we will identify what are the most relevant life cycle elements of the life cycle stage, what are the most relevant impacts in terms of circularity or environmental or other technical performance, and then we will define the corresponding requirements to improve the situation. Because it's not only about the impact, the theoretical impact, but it's also about the possibility of improvement. So the improvement potential is an element that is at key when defining the requirements. Next slide, please. What kind of requirements that might be? In the legislation, we have a list of possible aspects, environmental aspects that we may include. You see things like durability or usability that are more circularity related. There are possibility of doing a more systematic tracking of, for example, chemicals, and there is a possibility of doing requirements on recycled content, or the whole issues related to the footprint of a product, being it carbon footprint, being it water footprint, being it the environmental footprint. So all these things could be looked at. It does not mean that everything will be included in terms of requirements. It will only be the most relevant elements that will be looked at, impact assessed, and then eventually requirements might be developed. Next slide, please. Now, the digital product passport. This is one of the novelties that this new regulation has introduced. As we will see, the passport is basically a kind of a portal or a vehicle of information that different stakeholders will have access to. There are a number of elements that make this DPP different from anything that has been done in the past. For example, it will not be a centralized database. Until now, the Commission has mostly developed or only developed centralized system to collect information. With the passport, we are kind of changing paradigm and changing approach and trying to develop a system that is decentralized, meaning that the information will remain where the information belongs, with the people who have produced the information, and we will create a system that enables to have access to the specific information that is required. We will work through basically technical standards that will be developed. I will explain more on that in a few minutes. But the other things that I want to mention is that the information, the passport will not include all possible information about the product that you can imagine or would you like to see, but will be built starting from the most relevant information that is needed to increase the circularity of the product and to decrease the environmental impact related to that product. Next slide, please. In terms of business case, we have seen already passports being developed by industries, also by some member states doing that kind of experiments. That is the proof that there is a business for that, the passport will bring a number of benefits to all different actors in the supply chain, from the extraction of raw materials to the possibility of using, for example, digital twins more consistently, to the possibility of creating new markets, for example, by improving the recyclability of products. It will be important for market surveillance operator, for member states, for custom operators. It will be important for us to design better policies, and also to better review the existing policies by having access to market intelligence about the real performance of products. And last but absolutely not least, maybe even centrally, it will allow citizens, consumers to have access to information that it is relevant for them. So improving the way they do the experience when buying products, and allowing them to choose products that are more in line with their values. Next slide, please. In terms of what kind of information will be included in the passport, I already mentioned before the environmental aspects that might be included. Here is just to explain that basically there are two chapters in the passport. There are information that what we call is track and trace identifier. So it's information that is not specific to the performance of the product, but it is more related to its supply chain. So who has produced the product, where this production took place, and other key information. For example, the tariff code, that is a code used by custom operators, could be included in this track and trace component of the passport. And then there will be the performance specific part of the passport, where again information about technical performance or environmental information or circularity indicators might be included. And the passport might also include documents that are related to the compliance of the product itself. Next slide, please. In terms of how it will work, basically it will be the economic operator placing the product on the market that will have the responsibility, that he will have, or he or she will have, three responsibilities. The responsibility of making sure that a passport exists for the product to be placed on the market. Responsibility to be sure that the passport includes all the information that the secondary legislation will require. So if we require 10 items in the passport, the economic operator placing the product on the market has to be sure that those 10 items are there. And third, and important responsibility, is that they will have to be responsible that the information included is reliable. So it will be up to them to create the information in the passport, going back into the supply chain as far as needed. You may have noticed that also in the previous slides there is an element called registry. This will be the only element of centralization of the system. So I told you that the passport is a decentralized system, and that is mostly true. There is a tiny element of centralization that is basically required, because in order to use the passport to run, for example, automatic customs control at the borders, the way the IT system for customs control is built today, it requires to work through a centralized database. So that means that we need to build a registry that will only include the minimum amount of information, maybe only one information, the unique identifiers, that will allow the custom operators to do this automatic control. So it will be a very thin registry, including a minimum amount of information, because again, as I said, the idea is to develop a decentralized system. Next slide, please. In terms of how it will work in practice, it's something that will resemble very much experience that we already have as consumers. So it will be basically, we will scan a data carrier. That could be a QR code, it could be a digital watermark, it could be an RFID. Through scanning the data carrier, an API, so an app, basically will link that data carrier to the information that we need. Another thing that is very important is that it will be information released based on a need-to-know basis. That means that depending on who you are, who you represent, you will have access to certain information, but not everything. So recycler will have access to a subset of information, member state authorities will have access to another subset of information, consumers will have access to another subset of information. So when you will do your scanning, you will identify yourself, and based on that, certain information will appear on your screen and not everything. Next slide, please. In terms of how this will be implemented, basically we have designed an approach that relies on 3 stages. The first stage is what we did. So with the adoption of the regulation, we have introduced the concept of the passport, certain key definitions, we have defined the scope, and we have also identified some key features that I will mention in the following slide. Then the second level will be the work that is starting now and that will take place for the next 2 or 3 years, and that is the work of the standardization. So basically, the design of the what we call the system infrastructure, so the IT system behind, will be developed through technical work, through standardization work. A number of standards already exist at an international and European level. They need to be adapted, of course, to the specific needs of the passport, but other standards do not exist. They need to be drafted basically from zero. So we will prepare standardization mandate for the European Standardization Organization, and then we will task them to develop these standards. Of course, we also, no, not yet. Please go back 1 slide. Okay, thank you. Of course, we also need to be sure that if there is any delay or if there are issues with the standardization work, we are still in the position to implement the legislation. So there is a fallback option that is an empowerment to the Commission to adopt common specification with the technical requirements that will be needed to make the passport operational. But for us, the main avenue remains the standardization work. There is also a research program that will start in the coming weeks through the Digital Europe program that also will do similar work to this. So they will work really closely related with the standardization bodies, and they will do test some proto passport, if we can call them, for 3 sectors, that is batteries, ICT, and textiles. Then the third element of the action will be when we develop the specific product requirements at product group, then at that moment we will decide what information has to be included in the passport for that product groups, and we will decide the access right. So who has access to the different bits of information. The other thing that I want to mention on these slides is that the DPP will be mandatory for all products, but only for those that will be regulated. So as I told you at the beginning, ESPR applies to all products, but food, feed, and pharmaceutical, but only when you have a delegated act introducing requirements, then the passport will become applicable to those products. So if there is no delegated act, there is no passport. Next slide, please. I mentioned that some key features have already been introduced in the regulation. What are these key features? The first is that we will only rely on open global standards. So no proprietary solutions will be allowed. And we will work on a passport that has to be machine readable and has to be interoperable. So interoperability is an essential requirement for us. In terms of granularity, so what level of information will be included in the passport, we have 3 possibilities. We can work at the model level, we can work at the batch level, or we can work at the item level. These will be defined product by product in the delegated act. As I mentioned already, access right will be on a need-to-know basis. The liability already I mentioned will be the economic operator who will be liable and responsible for creating the passport and the information included in the passport. And then we have included also some elements that are more related to the traceability and transparency along the value chain, like the need to define an operator identifier and a facility identifier that will allow to better do the tracing, the track and tracing operations. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, standardization will work. What kind of standards we will develop? We have identified families of standards to be developed. They are listed here. So we go from data carriers and unique identifiers, access right management, interoperability, which is probably the key part, data storage, data processing, another key part, data authentication, reliability, and integrity, and then all the issues about security, cybersecurity, and privacy of information. Next slide, please. Okay, that was the last slide. So with I think a perfect timing, I thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thanks a million, Michele, for this very comprehensive overview of this very important new eco-design for sustainable products regulation. Thanks a lot, Michele. It's now time again for other polls. So you will see the questions. So the third question we would like to ask you, after the presentation from Michele, now that you know a bit more in detail how the new proposed digital product passports, but only for the products that will be covered by the delegated acts, will work, do you think that the DPP will be beneficial to, first, the environment, second, manufacturers, repairers, remanufacturers or recyclers, 3, consumers, 4, public authorities, for example, market surveillance authorities and customs authorities, or last possible answer, all of the above. You have a few seconds to vote, and we are looking forward to see the result. We will now close the poll and look at the results. So, very interesting. Michele, well done. Your presentation convinced the audience. 56% of the participants, and if I'm correct, we have around 380 participants, which is really not bad, mentioned that the DPP will be beneficial to all. 21% mentioned it will be beneficial in particular for public authorities, 11% for consumers, 8% for manufacturers, and 4% for the environment. Thank you. Let's move to the last question for today with the online poll. Last question. What will the digital product passport mean for you? Will the DPP be a business opportunity? Possible first answer. Will the DPP be an additional administrative burden? Possible answer 2. DPP will be both a business opportunity and an administrative burden. Answer 3. No opinion. Answer 4. You have a few seconds to vote. We will now close the vote and show you the answers. So, 54% of the participants mentioned that the DPP will be both a business opportunity and an administrative burden. 32% administrative burden. 9% it will be a business opportunity, which surprised me a bit to have such a low figure, but it is as it is. And 5% no opinion. Thanks a lot to you all. We will now move to the next item on our agenda. We will now hear some statements from Orgalim and also from the NGO ECOS. We will start first with Louise Bühnemann, who is the chair of Orgalim Environmental Sustainability Working Group and the head of EU Environmental Policy at the Confederation of Danish Industries, a member of Orgalim. Dear Louise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie, and also thank you, Mr. Galatola, for the presentation. I realize that now the proposal is no longer in the hands of the Commission, but in the hands of Parliament and Member States, but it's still very useful to get more information and better understanding of the proposal from the Commission's point of view. Orgalim, if you would change to the next slide, please. Orgalim welcomes this proposal We welcome the ambition of sustainability, and we stand firmly behind the circular economy. In fact, we believe that our industries will deliver the circular economy and all these sustainable products. We deliver the technology. We also very much support that the Commission sets out the ambition to secure the single market with this proposal, or at least contribute towards it. We find that a well-functioning single market is really the very important underpinning of a circular economy, and for us, the companies, to be able to deliver all these new sustainable products. So very important. As we've seen in the polls, a lot of our industries have experience with the Eco-Design Directive, the current one. And we are pleased to see that some of the principles of that legislation we also find in the proposal of the future regulation, because we find that several principles have worked so well that it's good to see them again. I'll especially mention, as we also saw in the poll, the product by product approach, because products are not the same, and what makes one product sustainable is not what makes another one sustainable. Therefore, the requirements should not be the same. Another principle that we find is very important is stakeholder involvement. We believe that industry has important insights that are necessary for the regulation to be a success in practice. And we really want to be part of forming and making sure that the legislation works. I will also name use of harmonized standards as an important value of the current Eco-Design Directive and what we hope to see in the future. And then finally, we very much appreciate the focus on market surveillance. Again, the single market is such an important starting point for the circular economy, and we really do need a level playing field for that to be a success. Then finally, on the digital product passport, we, for obvious reasons, don't have so much experience with that. However, we do see a lot of potential in it. We see potential for circular economy, for circular business models, for better use of the resources in market surveillance, and also transparency. And now might be a good time to change to the next slide. Because while we definitely support transparency and easier access to data, we also worry that we might deliver unwillingly some data to our competitors, and we are very concerned about that part. We cannot at this point read, particularly out of the regulation, how our data, our confidential business data and trade secrets will be protected in the future, and that's a very high priority for Orgalim members. Another concern we have, especially on the digital product passport, is that already today, companies are entering in data to databases and are delivering a lot of information. So I'm somewhat reassured when the Commission tells us that it will be a decentralized system. We very much support that part because we do worry that we will be asked to enter more information, be giving an additional administrative burden that without the following value of it, because in worst case scenario, it would be the same data. Another aspect of this is that we do worry about double regulation, particularly for chemicals. They are today regulated in REACH and ROS, and we strongly recommend that they stay there. And in general, our recommendation is start small with the digital product passport. Let's see that both the technical side of things and the regulatory side of things works before we expand with many different aspects and many requirements and many different products. Let's start small. Then for the last point, I will mention that we do fear that there are some elements in the regulation that will add a burden and not add value. And I will mention third-party verification as one of them. But to sum up, we support the regulation, we support the ambition, and while we have some concerns, we stand ready to deliver our expertise and be part of forming this regulation and making it work in practice. And I think, if I may ask a question to Michele Galatola, I think you touched upon our biggest concern about security. You touched upon the decentralized system, but we would also like to know what your plans are for us to avoid to duplicate our efforts, and the databases that are there today, is it in the Commission's plans to perhaps merge them into the DPP?
Thank you very much, Louise. Michele, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Louise, for the interesting presentation about the position of Orgalim and for the questions. So let me address both of them. If I may ask the colleagues who are dealing with the slides, if you can put back, yes, because I have a couple of slides that will help me explaining the reply. So let's start from saying that it is the intention of the Commission not to increase the administrative burden for companies. And that is always a key thing that we look at. At the same time, it is important to understand that there are then the practical difficulties that we need to overcome. And I want to explain you, to provide you a few examples. For example, the links between DPP and SCIP. The SCIP database, as you know, has been introduced as part of the Waste Framework Directive, the Article 33. I mean, I don't want to discuss now why we have that. We have it. But the point is why the DPP cannot replace the SCIP from day one, for example. There are differences. If you look, for example, at the difference between the SPI and the SCIP from the point of view of the product groups, SCIP applies to all products. Okay, the SPI, I mean, it's ESPR, previously was called the SPI, only applies to a subset of products. So there is already a first difference between the scope of the two tools. But then, for example, if you look at what chemicals are included, then you will find another difference, because SCIP is about substances of very high concern. In ESPR, we don't make that specification, so it's even a wider spectrum of substances that might be in scope of ESPR. So there is a second difference in terms of scope. But then it doesn't stop there, because, for example, if you look at the granularity of the information, the SCIP database works with data at batch level only. As I explained in my presentation, in ESPR, we may work at model, at batch, or item level. So there is a third differences. So when you look at all these differences, then you understand why a switch from one day to the other, from one system to the other system, is not possible. So the intention is, for the data where there is an overlapping, you will not be required to introduce them twice. So we will take care of making the links between the DPP and the SCIP. And luckily enough, from the IT perspective, that is not mission impossible, because it has been designed, the SCIP database, in a way that from an IT perspective, the link is feasible to establish that link. But it will not be a switch from one system to the other. If we move to the next slide, I would like to explain what is with April, for example. I mean, April is, as you know very well, the database where you find information on products that have an energy label, and so things that are more related to the old eco design directive. And it's a system that we've just recently launched. In terms of what kind of information you find in April and what kind of information you will find in DPP, there are a lot of similarities. It's not a one-to-one match, but I tried to play with colors to show you where is the perfect match and where there is not a match. But you would say it's quite a satisfactory match. So you could think, okay, April and DPP, we can replace one with the other. Actually, the answer is no, and I will explain you why in the next slide. because when you look at how the system have been designed, you will see that April is, let's say, the old classical centralized system that has been structured in order to make available information in a certain way to the stakeholders, to either the authorities or the consumers, while, as I tried to explain, the DPP is a fully decentralized system. So they have been designed in a completely different way, and that makes it very challenging to make the two speak to each other and to replace one with the other. So I would say in the short, medium term, we don't intend to replace April, because April is working for what it has been designed to work for. So we will continue using April, and we will continue providing there the information that is necessary, because as you have seen in the previous slides, there's not so much difference in terms of information. So let's say for energy using and energy related product, we will continue investing on April. For other products, we will probably using more the DPP. Now, that does not mean that in the medium long term, the two systems may converge, but at least it's not something that we intend to do in the short term. Thank you. I hope that's clear.
Thank you very much, Michele and Louise. We will now move to Margot, who is the program manager at ECHOS, to hear the perspective from an NGO. Margot, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. So thank you very much for having me today. So I'm going to be presenting the position of ECHOS on the SPR and the DPP. ECHOS, while we were an NGO, we work on environmental policy, and more specifically, we look at standardization processes and technical aspects of legislation. What do we do in standardization? That's not always very straightforward, especially for the industry. So I think that's useful to say it. We contribute to transparency and inclusiveness in the standardization processes. And what we want is that standards not only meet the needs of industry, but also those of the wider society and the environment. Especially when standards come out of legislation, for us, it's important that they meet the ambition of the legislation. So for example, when we're going to work on having targets on recycled content, how are you going to measure recycled content? If you need to have an assessment of the environmental performance of your products, what are you going to put in your life cycle analysis? Is this kind of questions that we look at. And to do this, we are supported by a network of experts, but also our members. You can move to the next slide. So we have 54 members. Most of them are NGOs. They are spread across Europe and a little bit beyond. And we support them also in their work at the national level and when they work with standardization bodies. So you can move to the next one. Okay, so this is our position on the SPR. Basically, we've been working on eco-design for a rather long time now, and we think this is, overall, has been quite a success of a policy in improving sustainability in products. So we were very happy to see that the scope has been extended to new sectors, to new requirements overall in terms of eco-design. And we think that the framework as it is proposed is quite promising. Now, of course, the success will depend very much on the level of ambition when it's translated in delegated acts and the time frame for adopting these acts, because at the moment, what is being proposed by the Commission is very ambitious, and we're very happy with this. But in the past, there has been quite a lot of delays, and I think there's going to be a lot of resources to be put in. So we're going to be looking forward to see if we manage to stick to the timeline. We regret a couple of things. One of them is the exclusion, for example, of construction products from the scope. We think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, because while the construction products regulation is going to take some inspiration from the SPR, they will not benefit from the overall framework. So the work plan, the eco-design forms, which were very useful additions. If you can move to the next one, I'm now going to present our position on the DPP. Overall, on information requirement, we think they're very ambitious, and we very much welcome this. They're ambitious in terms of what their content. The list is pretty complete, but not everything is going to be mandatory, but most of it is very interesting. We think there are a couple of things that are missing, but overall, it's a complete list. The fact that most of these information requirements will be mandatory, even if you do not have performance requirements, this is something that we consider to be very useful, because it means that if you cannot yet set performance requirements, at least you will be collecting information that you need to then develop them and put the ambition where it is, where you can actually go. Like, you will know that you can go that far because you know that some manufacturers are already doing it. And it will also be very useful for these manufacturers who really want to improve their products, because even if they do not have targets or mandatory specifications, they will be able to access the information that they need to really design sustainable products. So in that sense, we're also very happy to see that there's going to be a differentiation between user types so that you can access the information that you need, and that this will not be hampered by having too much information, being flooded and not finding what you want, or getting buried in accessing because companies do not want to have everything available to everyone. So the need to know principle is quite interesting to see. It will be interesting to see how this is being implemented. We think, so the DPP is not there to replace labeling on products, obviously. I think there's a lot of information that still needs to be provided on the go when you're shopping, but it really is a way to display much more information. All the technical information that can be useful to a number of stakeholders like recyclers, but also what we would like to see is that you really have a clear distinction between the legal information, what is mandatory to put in, but also information that can be added on top of this. For example, green claims are not going to be regulated, and to be able to make a claim, you will have to provide information on this. And we think the DPP will be a great opportunity to display that information, make it accessible. Finally, for the DPP to work, we need to ensure that the information provided, well, is provided in the first place. So custom control and ensuring that a product cannot be put on the market before we're sure that the information has been provided. And we think this can be automated, this can be done rather easy, and this will be very important so that you do not distort the market, and that the information is reliable, because obviously if the information is not right, you're not going to make much of it, and that it is accessible. So that goes back to what I was saying about user types. It should be rather hassle-free to access the information. You should be allowed to get what you're entitled to, and it should act as some sort of a one-stop shop. And so the presentation of the structure is very interesting in that sense. So to conclude with the last slide, before the publication of the ESPR, we had prepared a number of fact sheets. So if you want to know more about what we think of it as an environmental NGO, we had prepared this list of make or break principles. So what we thought would be necessary for it to actually be ambitious and deliver on its objective of sustainability and circular economy, and what would be real missed opportunities or might actually make it a failure. So if you want to know more, you can have a look. We're currently updating our position based on the published proposal, so this will be coming up soon. And I will move on to my question to Michele Galatola. So you mentioned that the DPP will only work when there is a delegated act for a specific product group. So I would like to know what will be the criteria for excluding product groups from getting a delegated act, and if you already have ideas of which products will not be covered under the DPP.
Thank you very much, Margot, for your presentation and the interesting question. I will also have a couple of comments on what you said, if time allows. So let's start from the question. Basically, I mean, which kind of products will have a delegated act and not? That basically will depend on what will be part of the ESPR working plan. We are now working with the JRC, the Joint Research Center, that is, as you know, the scientific branch of the Commission, to look into all the different product groups that might be of interest. They will identify what will be in a priority list, so where we should start from, because as you mentioned, we don't have infinite resources. So in order not to have too many delays, we need to focus on what we can really deliver. So the JRC will prepare this drafting working plan, and it should be ready by the end of the year, and then we'll start consulting all stakeholders, member states, associations, NGOs, and everybody who has a stake in this, and that will define the priority list of intervention. Now, we say in the regulation, if there is an information requirement, then the DPP becomes mandatory. The point is that if for whatever reasons we will not have all the standards in place and everything that needs to make the DPP operational by the time when we adopt the first delegated act, then there is a risk that we create a loophole, because if there is no DPP, then we cannot have the delegated act with the information requirements. So in order to avoid that, we said, okay, if we are adopting the delegated act and there's not all the technical standards in place, then we may not have a DPP for those product groups. So that is one possible reason why you may have a delegated act without having the corresponding digital product passport. The second possibility is if there is already an existing system managed at EU level to provide similar or equivalent information. And April should come to the mind after my previous reply. So most probably, at least in the short medium term, for products that fall into the April, so energy using energy related, we probably will not have a DPP, but we will use April. So these are the two main exceptions to the rule, one product, one DPP. Now, if I can use 1 minute to provide a couple of feedback, you said full material and chemical composition and assembly plans should always be there. Well, I may disagree with you on that because it's not always relevant to have the full disclosure of material, the full disclosure of chemicals, or even the assembly plan to achieve certain circularity, to achieve our circularity objectives. We will look into what is relevant, and the information that is relevant we will require, but that doesn't mean automatically always require everything, because then there are issues related to IP and confidentiality that we need to protect. I mean, this is also something we don't want to create damages to companies through this through the legislation. So it's an element of attention. And I strongly agree with you when you say information should be reliable. And this is a more reply to Louise when she says they think that third-party verification is an unnecessary burden. At the same time, if we only rely on a self-declaration, I'm not 100% certain that the information will always be reliable. So I think we need a wise mix of self-declaration with third-party verification with certain information. So I hope that that is helpful. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Michele and Margot, and thanks a lot, Michele, for the words you said on information which needs to be relevant. Orgalim could have said exactly the same as you. Thank you so much, Michele and Margot. I now pass the floor to Jussi Mäkinen, Director of EU Regulation at Technology Industries of Finland, and he will tell us the preliminary results of an ongoing DPP pilot project in Finland. The floor is yours, dear Jussi.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for the kind introduction, and hoping to walk you through our preliminary findings. This has been a very good discussion, and I hope that I can add some perhaps practical points of view to that. So technology industries, we present more than 1,800 technology companies in 5 different fields of technology, and we are committed as an industry to carbon neutrality by 2035 and see the responsible and sustainable market economy as a key opportunity for our member companies. And therefore, we are very interested in the possibilities of digital product passport, and to get a better grip of what's cooking, we ran or are actually still running a joint project between us and Finnish textile and fashion industries. Our objectives for this project were to find out what would the general design concept for digital product passports data-wise look like if it were done from the standpoint and requirements of the companies. And so we touch firstly or elaborate the general concept from the point of view of companies, especially paying attention to incentives. And after that, we verify that concept by two use cases, actually. The first one is plant-based textiles, coming obviously from the textile industries, and where we have some groundbreaking companies coming from Finland and basing their activities on the fact that every tree that grows in Finland has been laser scanned, and the data that is contained starts quite naturally from individual trees that are grown in Finland. And from our point of view, we took in the use case of batteries, where we have these long international value chains, and they provide very good point of observation of different kinds of challenges and different players, especially coming from in and outside of the European Union. And we want to provide industry-driven point of view, especially on incentives and value drivers of digital product passport. May I have the second slide, please? So here is how we approach this, and we start, and as was mentioned also on the previous presentations, that we like to start from the existing arrangements and not to replace them, so to digitalize on a rather wide scale the existing product information, so that it's possible to follow the subject. And this there we would like to highlight the importance of, as was mentioned previously, the importance of having reliable and clear standards that are same to all. And then when we have that digital information, then we can place or put our attention to the transparency and standardization. As mentioned, we need same rules, we need robust standards, and those standards need to be of international character wherever possible. And then this product value chain builds a picture about product safety and sustainability. And these are the kind of key drivers that are the first in line. And then on the third or fourth stage, that enables easier communication about product quality and sustainability. And here we would like to underline the importance of brand and reputation benefits. So here the actual benefits and incentives start to kick in, and we see that here European companies really have a possibility to put that data into use and really show on a clear and concise way the value of doing responsible and sustainable business. And also this data that is developed by this or made available by this digital product passport, they enable companies to critically evaluate their own value chains, which is a subject in this rather recent directive proposal for corporate responsibility and due diligence. And we took into account or take into account different points of view. So points of view of consumers, service providers, recyclers, raw material providers, and material suppliers, as well as producers. And one key aspect on having this data is to really facilitate the development of circular business models. So it's not always about recycling, but have the data in place and design the data arrangement so that the data can be enriched from the production phase by data that is generated when the product is being used to facilitate the secondary or tertiary or further life cycles of the product before it's being recycled. Can we have the next slide, please? So the key takeaways, our project is still running. We endeavor to have finished report by late this month or early July. But the key takeaways or preliminary takeaways at this stage are especially incentives, and we need to have the and here perhaps a key thing is to have the definition of product right, so that the threshold of product is kept low enough in order to have this balancing effort, so that not all the weight is based at the end of the value chain, but it develops gradually, so that the digital product information would develop gradually, and that would have the balancing effect. So it needs to be the threshold for product needs to be rather low in order to have a modular system and data flow that keeps on enriching when these products are merged into more fine-tuned and complicated products. Here it's also important that the data is data arrangements are based and built upon the existing industry initiatives and standards. One key thing where we which we discussed a lot, and that has been already mentioned, is rather clear, is the administrative burden. So here it's very, very important to use wherever possible the industry's own initiatives and try and avoid administrative burden. And I think it was mentioned before, the ask only once principle, so that the companies could be able to rely that once they provide this required information, no further information or data on that product is to be required because of different set of regulation. Other key thing that we discussed with our companies that participated on workshops were access rights and the question of ownership of data. And I think here we need lots of discussion and elaboration so that we can switch from the discussion of ownership, which is usually binary, to the discussion of access and usage rights, where we can have several access rights that are not perhaps competing, but are that can be facilitated simultaneously. And we need really, that was very reaffirming to hear from Mr. Galatola's presentation, that the trade secrets and IPRs are being taken into account, and the principle of actual need is taken into account. So, and I think that we really need to discuss and elaborate based on our findings further these different dimensions of data, who gets access to which data, which is basically a minimum viable product for each player on this field of circular economy. And we would like to rely on decentralized verifiable credentials instead of having a third-party affirmation for data, and in order to have a flexible and modular and administratively proportionate data arrangements and systems. And finally, I would like to highlight the importance of having carefully phased modular ramp-up through those delegated acts. So these would be our key findings. Perhaps nothing that dramatic or unforeseen, and but we really need to pay attention to the incentive side, so that the companies can have rather also short-term business advantages from these arrangements, and keep the administrative side as light as possible. And I would like to ask especially the the different dimensions of data from Mr. Galatola. So how have you approached this in the Commission? That how will the different actors have access to different sets of data contained in the digital product passport, and what level of information shall they have access to? So has this been a key thing to discuss within the Commission while preparing this, and how happy are you with the or would you evaluate your maturity on the approach? Do you have a clear picture of what this should look like, or do we need further discussion on this issue?
Thank you very much, Jussi, for the presentation. Extremely interesting what you are doing, and I'm really eager to learn more when the pilot will be over. Coming back to your question, the decision was not to already decide now who will have access to what information. That probably would have been easier for us to say, okay, consumer will have access to this, and recycler will have access to that, and market surveillance to something else. But that would have been kind of against the principle that we have to take decision looking at the broader product group, because the reality is different from one product to the other. That for us is kind of a guiding principle, and we wanted also to implement that for these specific issues of the access. That is why the decision was to basically say, now we don't decide. When we do the delegated act, then we will evaluate case by case what is the situation for that specific product group. Because, for example, if we are dealing with, I don't know, a smartphone, just to mention one, then maybe the consumer wants to know information about the technical performance, the durability of the product, its repairability, maybe even the carbon footprint could be of interest to them because it's kind of fancy. But then maybe the recyclers need to know if a specific chemicals is included in the specific part of the plastic, for example, to improve the recycling, and the consumer does not need to have access to that information. And maybe the market surveillance authorities would like to know where the product has been produced, if it's coming from a specific country or not, and the recyclers does not need to have access to that information, not even the consumers need to have access to that information. So that is the discussion that we will have with the stakeholders when developing the delegated act. What information and who has to have access to that? Then there is the discussion of how, from an IT perspective, you do that, and that is a completely separate conversation. But we will discuss at that stage, not now, because then it would be, shortcuts are never a good solution, in my opinion, humble opinion. I also want to reassure you when you say, for example, decentralized verifiable credentials. That is something we have in our radar. That is something where we need to learn more how they would work in practice and to what extent they could complement or replace third-party verification, for example. So we are not excluding that. We are not saying, okay, it's just third-party verification. We know that there are other alternatives. We need to explore them because at least we don't think we have sufficient experience with that. And that is why the conversation will never stop. It's an ongoing discussion with you, with the stakeholders. That is why we will have standardization work. That is why we have been funding the Digital Europe program that will also look into these things, and we will probably keep finding research on issues related to that, because it's a very evolving environment that is often evolving much faster than we as policymakers can do to stay at peace of the developments. So it's not a conclusive answer, I know, but it's just a reassurance that our ears are open, our minds is open, but we have questions and we need to find answers. And often the old answers cannot be probably the best fitting to address the new questions and challenges that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jussi and Michele. We will now also invite Louise and Margot to join us for the last part of this webinar, which is the Q&A session between the panelists. And we will start with a question from Margot to Michele.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So the question that I have is that during a recent European Parliament hearing, the representative from the Commission mentioned that the DPP was being structured in a way that was modular enough so that other legislation eventually could branch on it and make use of the DPP. And I would like to know which legislation do you have in mind at the moment and that you think are likely to use the DPP, even if it's not certain at all. And if, for example, the construction product regulation could be one of them.
Okay, thank you, Margot. when we think at the DPP, how it is designed and how it will work, we have to imagine kind of two separate pillars of the building. One pillar is what we call the technical architecture, that is the system, that is all the IT standards and protocols and procedure that I listed in my presentation that you need to make a DPP work. Because another important thing is that we are not imposing one DPP. We are just putting out the rules and the standards in order then for the market to develop their own DPPs. What is important to us is that whatever DPP will fulfill the same rules and will be fully interoperable. Then it will be market operators developing their own tailored solution. That it's fine to us. So one thing is the IT system, and then the other thing is what we call the information architecture. So the data that will be included in the DPP. When Mr. De Almeida, who mentioned that during the hearing, what basically he was saying is that the way the technical architecture is designed, it will be the same. That means that any policy in principle could take that architecture and use the same architecture for their own policy objectives. Because what changed for the policy is the data. So it's the information architecture that changed. That is separate to a large extent from the technical architecture. So you will have the system and then you will have the data. What that means, that for example, I cannot make a specific example of a policy, but what I can tell you is that I have been bombarded by phone calls from colleagues from all commission services saying, oh, look, I have these policies that might use the DPP. How should I proceed? And I can mention, for example, the colleagues are working on the revision of the toy directive. And they are imagining of using, for example, the DPP to bring in the certificate of compliance in a digital form and to use the DPP as a vehicle to verify that, for example. Or, for example, if you think at the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, they're also, I think, also in the impact assessment, they're already making some links to the DPP, because when you import steel, you will need to check where this steel is coming from, for example, and what is the carbon footprint of that steel. And this is all kind of information that the system will allow to include, and then they decide through the data architecture to include. And you can go as wide as your imagination wants. So whenever there is a product policies that has specific requirements that you want to inform or you want to check, then in principle the passport could be the vehicle to bring that information. What it remains to be understood is that for the time being, the passport has been included in the context of ESPR and the products that will be regulated through ESPR with delegated act. That means that if you want to use the system through a policy or a product that is not in scope of ESPR, you will need to recreate the same system in the other legislation. So you need to kind of duplicate the system, keeping the same standard, keeping the same rules, but bringing it in the legal scope of another product. Maybe I'm speculating here, but maybe in some years from now, we will get to the point where it will make more sense to introduce a self-standing regulation called Digital Product Passport that will apply horizontally for all product groups. At this stage, we prefer to start small, as you were saying, only introducing it in ESPR, and maybe in future we can expand on that.
Thanks a lot, Michele. Louise, I think you also have a question for Michele.
Yes, I have. Several times you've mentioned today footprints, carbon footprints, etc. And I know that a lot of our members have worked with the product environmental footprint. And I was wondering, what is the link between the PEF and the ESPR legislation? And because a lot of products still don't have specific category rules at this point. So I would be interested to know if we need to hurry out as soon as we see the work plan and decide which to start doing category rules, or how it will work.
Okay, let's start from saying that the old eco-design, but also the new eco-design, is rooted in life cycle thinking. And life cycle assessment has often been used to do the preparatory work. So basically to do what we call the hotspot analysis, where basically you identify what is really relevant for that product group. And this will continue to be at the core of the work. And of course, as the Commission has adopted and renewed recently the recommendation suggesting PEF and OEF as the best available SCA methods worldwide, I mean, at least in Europe, we will continue using it for sure when doing the preparatory work to identify the hotspot. Now, it is also important to keep in mind that ESPR is not only about footprint, it is about circularity, and it is about other characteristics of the product that are not captured through the footprint. There are other tools that we use to look into things like repairability, durability, and other issues related to circularity. So PEF is not the silver bullet, the one solution fits all, but we will continue using it for the preparatory studies. Then it is possible, when relevant, that we may introduce information requirements or performance requirements that relates to the life cycle. And in that case, we will see what is the right method to do that. I could speculate it could be PEF, but there may be specific cases where we don't want or we don't need to use PEF. I mean, this will be seen at the product group level. But if you look at what is happening now, you also have some kind of indications of what may happen in the future. And I want specifically to make reference to the batteries legislation that we have adopted, and another piece of work on which we are now consulting stakeholders that relates to photovoltaic panels. In both cases, there are requirements related to carbon footprint. And in both cases, these requirements on carbon footprint has been built using the existing PFCR, both for batteries and for photovoltaic panels. So what does that mean? It means that if in future a PFCR exists, I bet we will use that at least partly to do our preparatory work. So it will be an important source of information. But that is not an essential need. So it does not mean that if a PFCR does not exist, we will not look into that, or we will develop a new PFCR. That could be possible, but is not a one-to-one relation. If a PFCR does not exist, of course, we need to look information somewhere else. So it's a bit a convoluted reply, but I mean, I cannot be more clear in the sense that in the end, it's the decision of industry if they want to develop a PFCR or not. Our feedback from industry is that they have found reasons to do it beyond the political request, because there is an inherent value in having a PFCR also for their own normal business. But of course, it's up to them. There are costs related to the development of PFCR, and this is a decision that they will have to take. On our side, we will continue working on the development of the PEF method, because we know that there are some impact categories that are maybe not optimal, where more work needs to be done. Science is evolving, and then there is all the discussion about the secondary data, availability of data, and quality of data, on which the Commission is continuing reflecting, investing, and we hope with the green claims regulation there will be also some important advancement in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michele. Last question from Jussi. To you again, Michele.
Yes, thank you. It has been very good discussion, and there are many questions, but I really have to concentrate on this one. So I presented the preliminary findings of our project, and we know that there are plethora of different pilots and projects on digital product passports, and so it raises lots of interest, and everyone wants to have their voices heard. Will the Commission have some kind of a structured way to evaluate the findings of these different projects?
I wouldn't say that there is a structured way of evaluating the results, but the point is there is a structured way of keeping open channels for communication. In the context of the SPR, for example, we will continue using the consultation forum, what before was called the Eco-Design Forum, where basically it's our stakeholders that have specific experience on certain issues, certain product groups, that we consult regularly to gather their experience and feedback. We will continue having dedicated workshop and stakeholder consultation to analyze certain elements, for example, on DPP or on market surveillance or on public procurements. We will see how the needs emerge. So whenever there will be, and we will participate in these projects and monitor them as far as possible. Of course, in your case, this is your own specific pilot, but anytime you will want to share even intermediate results with us, we will be very happy to look into them and having some informal feedback. And then the projects that are funded by the Commission, of course, we have a more direct way of interacting with the consortia. And all this information will be taken into consideration, as much as we will take into consideration the feedback that we will have from international partners. For example, there is an open dialogue with the World Business Councils for Sustainable Development, who are also working through the Pathfinder project on similar issues related to the passport, the PACT program. We are in conversation with the United Nations Environmental Program. We will be, I think, tomorrow having a conversation with WTO. So, you know, there are a plethora of international partners that will also be contributing to the work that we are doing, and we will take into account all this feedback.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michele and Jussi, for the interesting question. We will now move to the very last part of this webinar, which is the closing remarks from my side. So I would like, first of all, to thank a million our dear distinguished speakers, Margot, Louise, Jussi, and in particular also Michele from the Commission, who kindly presented the ESPR and answered to the many questions from all our speakers. Thanks a lot also to the many participants. We were close to 400 participants today, which is really showing the very high importance of this new proposed eco-design regulation for sustainable products, not only for the industry, but also for the society in general. As a reminder, the new Orgalim position paper on the ESPR is available in the handout section and also on Orgalim website. The recording of the webinar, as well as a news article summarizing the event discussions today, as well as a Q&A document and a new position paper, will be shared with all participants and registrants after the webinar and will be available on Orgalim website. We sincerely hope you found this webinar interesting. It was very interesting for us, the speakers and organizers, to organize it. So we hope it was the same on your side. Once more, thanks a million to you all. I wish you a very nice afternoon. This is the end of the webinar. Goodbye and thank you. Bye-bye.